Mainstream mental health is flawed, and I'm pulling back the curtain. I'm Andrea Clark, a former family therapist who walked away from the system to expose the truth. After my own journey from medication maze to holistic healing, I'm here to challenge the status quo and reveal the mental health truths most people don't know. The truth about mental health is your radical roadmap to wellness. Raw stories, expert insights, breakthrough solutions. This is where traditional modalities end and real healing begins. Dr. Lindsey Elmore is a licensed pharmacist, board-certified pharmacotherapy specialist, functional medicine clinician, yoga teacher, candidate for a diplomat in pharmacy law, speaker, and author. She has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and is a doctor of pharmacy who graduated from the University of California, San Francisco. She completed residencies in pharmacy practice and ambulatory care at Princeton Baptist Medical Center and New Hanover Regional Medical Center. She worked as an assistant professor of pharmacy practice and founding residency program director at Stanford University. In her next role as director of global education for a multi-million-dollar supplement company, she taught on stages in more than 30 countries. Dr. Elmore authored the Clean Slate Cleanse Cookbook and Workbook series, Bountiful, a psychonutrient cookbook, and Essentials, 75 Answers to Common Questions About Essential Oils and Supplements, and wrote a chapter in the international best-selling OOLA for Women. She hosts The Lindsey Elmore Show, a podcast that has reached more than 1 million downloads and is easy to find on all social media platforms. Y'all, this is a dear friend of mine, and I cannot wait for you to learn from her today. I have learned so many things just from chit-chatting with her over the years. I can't wait for you to dive into this conversation. Hello, my friend.
How's it going? I'm so excited to talk to you today and to get to see your beautiful face on camera.
I know, I'm so pumped. I've been waiting for this. So you guys listening in and watching, I just want you to know a huge reason why I took the leap of faith to even start this podcast is because of my dear friend, Dr. Lindsey Elmore here. And I've been waiting for you all to have an opportunity to hear from her. You already heard her intro, but I'd love for you to share just a little bit about what led you from conventional, traditional pharmacy to being a holistic pharmacist and all the things that you're really into and that you share about.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really natural progression in my career. I absolutely loved pharmacy school. I loved residency. And then I kind of got out into the real world and had some disagreements about curriculum at a university where I was employed because I was advocating for women's health and saying, like, we need pharmacists to know every single product that is on pharmacy shelves. And, that includes prophylactics, that includes now emergency contraception, that includes, menstrual care products, all of those things. And I kind of got pushback, to which surprised me because I was in charge of the over-the-counter medicine course. And I was like, wait. So we're going to graduate pharmacists who can't explain all of the products that are actually over the counter? That didn't make sense to me, and really got some pushback along the lines of those are things your mother teaches you and no one else does. And I was like, well, God forbid, a scared 14-year-old with her single dad walk into your pharmacy.
Yeah, that's a very interesting answer that you received.
Yes, it was very interesting. And I also worked in a variety of pharmacies where sometimes people with addiction issues were treated like second or third class citizens. I have always believed that clean needle exchanges save lives. And I worked in some pharmacies that were like, no, we don't do that. And I'm like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie with Julia Roberts where her son is an opiate addict. And Julia Roberts, the mom, goes to try to fill a prescription for Narcan, which is absolutely, bar none, a life-saving drug in someone who has an opiate addiction, or even someone who just has an opiate dependence and gets overdosed on a valid prescription. And the pharmacist is like, oh, no, we don't fill that. And then turns around and gives her son clean needles. So there was already this disconnect for me in like, I truly believe that pharmacists have a right to have their own ethics and integrity and to refuse to fill prescriptions. I also think if you're going to refuse to fill a prescription, you need to send somebody somewhere else that will, if it is a safe prescription. Then I had this moment. I was working as a transitions of care pharmacist, which, if you don't know, Medicare and Medicaid Services has this program where if a patient has certain disease states, like they have a stroke or they have a heart attack or they come in with a decompensated COPD and they come back to the hospital within 90 days, CMS won't pay for that indexed hospitalization because they're like, okay, you didn't do enough follow-up with the patient. You didn't make sure that they filled their medications correctly. They didn't have enough medication education, whatever. And so I was working in that field and, really liked it. But I remember one day I was talking to a patient and I was going in there and I was bringing him, his little white sack and it had 5 different medications in it. And I said, when you're a transitions of care pharmacist, you have to do something called medication reconciliation, where you reconcile what meds did you come in on, what meds were you given in the hospital, and what are you going home on, and are all those the right med, the right dose, the right route, the right, patient, all of the everything. And I was doing his med rec, and I was like, this guy came in on no medications, and I was taking him this bag of 5 brand new medications. And I just had this moment of just agony in my heart of like, hey, so this guy's been on these meds for 2-3 days after a heart attack. A lot could go wrong when he gets home. And going in there, I think I spent an hour with this guy just trying to explain over and over and over again how to take these medications correctly. And it just wasn't sinking in, probably because he'd been hospitalized for several days. It is confusing being in the hospital. And I was like, is there anybody in your family we can call? And he was basically like, I have no one outside of these walls. And so I reached a point where I kind of realized I was potentially doing more harm.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably felt scary to send him home when that was the conversation. You could tell he didn't really understand.
Well, there was that piece of it. And you really want to talk about something scary. I had a patient one time with severe diabetes, and he was a young guy. And he had developmental delays as a child and, a lower IQ as an adult. And we were transitioning him from standard insulin, which has 100 units of insulin per 10 mLs. It's called U100. We were transitioning him to U100, which has 500 units of insulin per 10 mL. So 5 times the dose. And I remember sitting down and using all of my health literacy education, taping off his syringes to be like, okay, here's your first 3 days. But I couldn't sleep that night. And this is also one of the most common med errors that nurses make, because it is so uncommon to have this strength of insulin, because it's only for people that are injecting just milliliter after milliliter after milliliter, which is unsafe. You're doing it sub-Q. It leads to all kinds of nodules and it's just not safe. And so I think recognizing how dangerous drugs can be, and recognizing how flagrantly the drug industries have been with their research, and just how there's a lot more that I've learned even now studying pharmacy law so much. But drug companies aren't truly required or mandated to prove that their drugs are safe or effective before they go to what we jokingly call the phase 5 clinical trial, where you just release it to the masses and go, we'll hope for the best. And then eventually there's a class action suit. So I just I started praying and was like, just God, give me a way, give me a way, give me a way, make me a way. And ended up getting hired as a director of education for a multi-billion-dollar supplement company, and spent the next years teaching people about supplements. And then I got some of the best advice I ever got from a boss, which was, you seem to really understand social media. That's what I want you to focus on, and really gave me permission to show up day after day after day on social media and just teach. And so then I end up leaving that employment and becoming a contractor for a few years. And when that contractorship ended, that's when I started exploring podcasting and started exploring like, okay, what does it mean to be affiliate marketing? And what does it mean to like really be an entrepreneur that's creating multiple income streams? And like, what does it mean to make money in your sleep? And that was around the time that, I got introduced to another supplement company, and it was one of those things. Like, I had spent 10 years building confidence and trust in an audience that all of a sudden I was an overnight success. And it really was nothing short of miraculous the way that it all happened. It really was just this desire for people to have options. Yeah. Trust me, I love pharmaceutical options. There is no doubt that in certain situations, they are absolutely life-saving. Yeah. And I think that there are a lot of superfluous meds that just kind of get tossed around as like a, let's, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And I just couldn't be a part of that anymore.
Yeah, you're totally right. That's how psychiatry works.
Yes, absolutely.
It is very much trial and error. And there are a lot of people hurt in the process of that trial and error. And I would love to go back to something you said about stage 5, right? Where they launch it to the public. For some people listening, they already understand this. And then some people are hungry to understand and they really don't have a lot of knowledge in this area. Would you be willing to share how a drug gets on the market? Like the process?
Yeah. So, market research starts in vitro. So you're starting kind of in a petri dish trying to figure out. There's also modeling that you can do where, let's say you want to make another antidepressant that works at the serotonin reuptake receptor. Well, you know what that receptor looks like. And so then you have to do a new drug application with the FDA that you're saying, all right, we want to take this into either animal testing or we want to take it into really small clinical trials with humans. And then you scale up from there. And then drugs get released into market, sometimes quickly, sometimes not so quickly. We have these emergency use authorizations, which most of our listeners will remember when HIV and AIDS first came onto the scene and how scary it was. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down of, conspiracy theories that may or may not be true. But, we did see emergency use authorizations for those medications, which have now proved to be life-saving. We saw them for the COVID vaccines that came out much more recently with emergency use. My concern is when you speed a drug to market and then all of a sudden you release it to the masses, you haven't done true due diligence to decide if the drug is safe and effective. I know that when I was in residency, there was a drug, Drotricogen alpha, that we thought was like this miraculous life-saving cure for people who had septic shock. And so people were really, really getting close to death because of infection. And when their cardiovascular system, their kidneys, their liver, everything starts shutting down because the infectious load is so high. Yeah, 3 years later, the drug gets pulled from market because the data was falsified, and it's
right.
And so you get into those situations where you're just like, you're talking a very, very expensive drug for people already on the brink of death. And then you come to find out like it never worked in the first place. Because here's the thing too, during all this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, nobody goes back and demands the raw data. Like the Microsoft Access database or whatever they're storing all of this raw data in can just be deleted, and it's very well known. And John Abramson, who I interviewed on my podcast, he's a Harvard MD, and he wrote really a very easy to read and fascinating book about just how skewed drug research has become because of the lack of transparency. Another tangent book on this topic is David Michael's The Triumph of Doubt, where he talks about how the tobacco industry really wrote the textbook on how do we create doubt in, is this product really dangerous? We don't know. I mean, here's a study that says it is. Here's a study that says it's not. And that model has not only been adapted by Big Pharma, where it's not necessarily about, let me show you hardcore point blank that this drug is safe and effective in this patient population for this disease state at this stage of development. And we also we've seen women strategically sidebar from medical research. I mean, women were only allowed to be participants in clinical trials in the 60s and 70s. And so and that was just because they wanted to bring birth control to the market.
Yeah.
And, and so that model that tobacco created of let's not try to prove it's safe and effective. Let's try to sow seeds of doubt that it is dangerous has been duplicated by the sugar industry, by the NFL. Guys, banging your heads into 300-pound linebackers doesn't sound unsafe at all.
Right.
What does study after study show? It doesn't increase the risk of concussions. Excuse me, madam. But there's also duplicated by the alcohol industry. Back in the 90s and 2000s, we all saw that J-shaped curve where no alcohol is dangerous. And then you drink 2 to 3 drinks a day, and that's going to be protective for your cardiovascular system. And then only after 4 to 5 drinks a day are you getting into the danger zone.
Yeah.
We now know that to be patently false. We also saw a proliferation in the thousands of what are called Me Too drugs. And these Me Too drugs, this is another form of drug development, is you take a current drug and the drug company goes, wait a minute, we're about to go off of patent for this drug. And we need a new drug that can be on patent because we can charge more for it. And so it will create a cousin of that drug. A great example of this is citalopram and S-citalopram. So Lexapro and Celexa. And so in chemistry, there are 2 ways that a molecule can kind of sit. And so it can sit with if you put your hands up beside each other, if you're just listening on audio, with all your fingers pointed up, or you can point half of, one hand down and then the other half up. Well, that's what are called enantiomers, which is the R configuration or the S configuration. So a lot of the times what these drug companies will do is they will take a blend of the R and S, the way the molecule is flipped, and they'll just isolate for one of those, call it a new drug. Now it's on patent, and now they get to charge more for it. And huge amounts of what used to be called detail men are now called drug reps to go out there and convince you that this new drug that is more expensive with arguably no additional benefit, because this is another thing that happens in drug research is we all talk about the randomized placebo-controlled trial. Well, if all I'm doing is splitting this R and S configuration of drug, I don't care how it compares to placebo. If I've got S-citalopram and not just citalopram, you need to be comparing that to citalopram.
Right.
Because if you've got an ultra cheap, relatively safe, although arguably ineffective drug, it doesn't matter how it compares to placebo. You need to compare it to the active constituent. Another thing, you and I love to talk gut health and how important it is for our overall mental health. And the serotonin hypothesis about depression has been widely debunked at this point. But the thing that really gets me is the way that these drugs work is your gut has to be healthy enough to actually be making serotonin. Because if you can't make serotonin, there is no serotonin to sit in between your nerve endings and what's called the synapse where the nerves come together. And so if there's no serotonin in your gut getting made, the drug doesn't even have a fighting chance to work. And so I am a pragmatist. I'm just if we're going to use medications, same with supplements. If you're going to use supplements or medications, let's at least use them correctly. And let's at least use them in a way that gives them a fighting chance to work.
Absolutely. What's really interesting, you bringing that up, a client of mine is having her son see a pediatric psychiatrist who will not prescribe whatsoever until they address gut health. And they see this psychiatrist, I'm really hoping to get the psychiatrist on the podcast, but they see a transformation just with addressing the gut health oftentimes and don't even need to go to prescribing anything.
Well, the thing about pediatrics and psychiatric medications, number one, all of the antidepressants carry a black box warning, which is the strongest warning that the FDA can offer for safety risks. And so all of the antidepressants in adolescents and teenagers carry a black box warning for suicidality and suicidal thoughts and suicidal tendencies. And so you've got a child who's already depressed and really a lot of the time just doesn't know how to handle big people feelings for the first time. And instead of walking them through it and in training good lifestyle behaviors that have been come on. There's a reason that every healthcare advocate out there is basically telling you the same thing. You need to get up in the morning and go outside and get some sunshine. You need to go to bed when the sun goes down. You need to eat right. You need to exercise. You need to cut out toxic friendships and relationships.
It's not a trend. It's the foundation of your mental health. That will make a tremendous difference, just that itself. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing that really concerns me about the use of psychiatric medications in pediatrics is if you look at the typical antipsychotics, which are generally not used even in adults because they have such a severe side effect profile. But if you look at the atypical antipsychotics, which are commonly prescribed for solely pediatric conditions like oppositional defiant disorder, you out of that at age 18, according to the DSM-5. And so you look at these atypical antipsychotics, the average weight gain on some of these medications can be upwards of 10 pounds. If you get to some of the bigger boy medications, you're talking 30 pounds of weight gain. Well, now we're talking about bringing in issues of being bullied, about a lesser self-image. We're also talking about a lifetime risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. When I agree with you, if you look at functional medicine, the starting point for everyone is an elimination diet. Let's figure out what's causing you to be inflamed. Let's figure out what's causing you to have high cortisol and to have high stress levels. You and I are both such huge advocates for therapy and how much it can help. And we've got to get to a point where starting with medications, because especially when it comes to the antidepressants and atypical antipsychotics, it is 100% a guessing game. Which one's going to work better? Is it going to be fluoxetine or paroxetine? I can make a differentiation based on the fact that paroxetine is going to cause more weight gain, but fluoxetine has got more data. And so it's like, it is just a guessing game. And the worst thing, if you are listening to this podcast and you're like, oh crap, now I don't know what to do because here's this pharmacist telling me like all of these meds have these side effects. I mean, again, give them a fighting chance to work. The cyclical nature of like every month when you go in, you're getting a new prescription for a new drug is simply ineffective at best and dangerous at worst. And so we need to, if you're going to do a trial of antidepressants, give it 6 to 12 weeks to see how you truly feel while simultaneously giving the drug a fighting chance to work by working on your gut health, working on your relaxation patterns. Because if we also think about functional medicine, the way that you heal the gut is something called the 5R protocol. And I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with probiotics and replacing, enzymes and vitamins and minerals. But the 5th R is really, really important. And that is to rebalance your attitude. Because as long as you are living in a state of chronic fight or flight, you're never going to calm down your body enough to really be able to sit with your emotions. And sitting with your emotions sucks. I mean, it takes work. It takes a lot of work. Nobody likes sitting with your bad feelings, but I'm a huge fan of the feelings wheel so that you can actually articulate not just like, well, I'm angry, but like I'm exasperated by this thing. And if you really dial in on that language and give yourself permission to feel your feelings, all emotions are just data. They're just data. And you got to sit back and go like, why am I getting triggered by this other person? Or like, why am I angry out of nowhere? Because that's where true healing and true mental health can come from.
Absolutely. And I think speaking with on the pediatric psychiatry piece, I have a story with like a personal story with that. And it's interesting because I was prescribed Paxil before the black box warning, and I was prescribed during the time when that study was suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about this a lot when I share my story online, that I definitely had dysregulated emotions. I definitely was struggling with my home environment, but I do not remember having feelings that I wanted to die or that I wanted to try to take my life or anything like that. And then that, I was prescribed Paxil, and then I stopped being able to sleep. So then I was prescribed Ambien. And really that's when these feelings of entertaining this idea of death and not wanting to be here anymore, and this idea of, well, what would it feel like if, I ended my life, came into my brain. And nobody ever questioned that, which I thought was really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also
back now, right, as an adult, and really being able to see a lot of it for what it was. And but nobody ever questioned any of that.
Well, I think there's such a stigma around admitting that you are having these thoughts that it's something as a kid, you don't even quite know how to articulate how you're feeling. But I too had my own mental health struggles. I mean, I struggled with bulimia for a really, really long time, was placed on Prozac as like a 14-year-old, and same thing. And it wasn't just the thoughts. It was like, there were some scary moments in there that I won't, describe in detail just because I don't want to trigger anyone. But like, I don't remember bringing that up to my prescriber and being like, hey, I'm having these thoughts and these actions. And now looking back on it, it's like I was the same as you. Like that black box warning didn't exist. And you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yeah. Well, I was hospitalized actually for 2 suicide attempts. So it was very out in the open, right? Like,
yeah.
But I think what wasn't questioned is I gained so much weight. I probably gained 20 pounds, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
I have pictures of this progression of just how my, like the glossiness of my eyes. I went from being this very studious young lady to I still earned the grades, but I was sleeping through like my first 3 classes every day. I mean, it was just crazy how it changed me. And I also none of the original feelings that I was experiencing went away. And so it just made things worse, at least in my experience, right? I know that's not everybody's experience, but I just find this phenomenon fascinating around how things are prescribed, just trying to play around and figure it out. And most kids can't express what it's doing to them. Most kids can't, right? And most teens can't. And it's really the parents who are in charge.
Right.
And it's Russian roulette of what type of practitioner you get put in front of. And
and I think for a lot of people, opiate medications are meant to dull pain, but they don't just make you not feel pain. They make you feel nothing.
Yeah.
Anti-anxiety medicines don't make you not feel anxiety. They make you feel nothing.
Yes. Yes.
And antidepressants, it's not that they make you feel less depressed. They just make you feel nothing. And that's not who we were meant to be as human beings. Like, we're supposed to have these fluctuating emotions. I can't remember who said it, but if you didn't know what sadness felt like, how will you ever know what joy feels like? And, I think of like the mood stabilizing medications for people with bipolar disorder. It'll stabilize your mood so that you're not up on an Amazon shopping spree at 3 a.m., but you just don't feel anything. And that puts people at risk for more drug-seeking behaviors where you're still trying to chase that like dopamine rush or the oxytocin rush or whatever, because we're not meant to feel nothing. As much as it sucks to sit with your negative emotions, it's better than feeling nothing, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's so complicated, right? Especially for pediatrics, because there's so much that, goes into it. It's family dynamics and school dynamics and, so many things, peer pressure and social dynamics. And I feel very strongly that we're just not resourced enough. Mm-hmm. And that the first line of defense is not medication. It's getting all these other ducks in a row. I think back to, I'm at this point, this is how I have this passion. And so it is what it is. But if we just had some family therapy, if my mom really understood how I was feeling about my stepdad, right? And things he was doing, or things could have looked a lot different for the journey that I've been on and how those medications affected my health. Also, how it made me feel to be put on a medication when I felt like nothing was wrong with me, to be really honest with you. Why am I being medicated? Like, what is happening? I'm pretty sure my stepdad's a dick. Like, that's how... I'm just like, what? I'm the problem? I'm pretty sure you two need to be sitting here.
I was just about to say, and can we just talk about the emotional regulation of parents?
Right.
And like how that can completely throw off childhood dynamics and their experience with their mental health. It's like if your parents are constantly fighting in front of you, or if you're having like people calling you names, or if you're not getting adequate nutrition, or you've got an absentee parent, like all of those things are really hard. And it is, I'm not a parent, so of course I know exactly how to raise children. And so it's like, it sucks because as much as you try, all parents like mess up their kids in some way, shape, or form. We all were messed up, but like you do such a great job on your social media of talking about like, here is where I really messed up, and like the conversations that I've had to have with my child about like, hey, that was me in a state and you should not have seen that. But how do we deal with that now that you have? And I think
repair is honestly, if you have rupture and then you have repair, children do really okay. It's when you have rupture after rupture and they're, or distant, kind of what would be considered neglect, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no repair. that's when damage really is done, right?
Yeah.
Bond Charge brings you cutting-edge wellness tools like red light therapy, EMF shields, cold therapy, and light therapy glasses, all designed to support your body's natural healing process. Red light therapy is clinically shown to boost mitochondrial function and reduce inflammation. EMF shields help to protect against the effects of everyday radiation exposure from our devices. Blue light blocking glasses are shown to improve sleep and reduce eye strain. I am obsessed with so many of their products. My home is stacked with EMF protectors. I use their red light tools weekly, and I love their light sensitivity glasses. I'm seeing a huge reduction in my migraines. Bond Charge is HSA and FSA eligible, so investing in your health has never been easier. Visit bondcharge.com and use code MHM for 15% off. You can also check the show notes for links and codes. So it's not an excuse for anybody to just keep rupturing and oh, well, I can repair, so it's fine. But it's more the repair really keeps that trust there. And I think, and if this isn't a like, let's poop all over parents, it's just more, sometimes there's such a lack of awareness and there's so much pressure to have compliant children and teens in this world. And I do think that that's where a lot of these like I try to put myself in my mom's shoes a lot because she and I have not had this conversation. We can't, to be honest with you. Like,
is she listening right now? I don't know.
Even though I have this podcast.
Oh,
that's how much like she struggles with talking about, you know, the past. And so I'm always like, okay, what was going through her mind? And I know she had a lot of pressure. She had no idea what was going on. She had my stepdad, you know, pushing a certain agenda about needing me to be compliant. And I wasn't compliant. I stood up for me and my siblings a lot. And she was overwhelmed. And there were a lot, right? So I can have a lot of empathy. And I think a lot of parents experience this. And then what happens is they get in front of sometimes the wrong practitioner who's just kind of like, let's just try all this different stuff and let's add. And then there's this snowball effect of poor health and other things that are happening. And it's just hard because people don't know where to look for this information. That's the biggest thing for me is my mom didn't know to go look at the FDA website. It's a public website. And I'll be honest, I just started diving into it the last week and I'm thinking there's so much information here. This is beautiful. Why aren't we all looking at it more? You know?
Well, number one is because, you know, if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know where to look, you don't know where to look. And if you're not really highly schooled in health education, reading clinical trials is like a foreign language. I mean, there's a reason that I have a doctorate of pharmacy. It's because I've been indoctrinated into a new language. All, you know, doctors, I guess I don't have a doctorate. I have a doctor of pharmacy. That's a distinction that lots of people will get on to me for. But anyone who has a doctor of something has learned a new language, a new way to think, a new way to assess a situation. It's like trying to talk to an attorney. Like you have no effing clue what they're trying to say, you know, because they have been indoctrinated into legal Latin, just like I was indoctrinated into pharmaceutical Latin. And so if you don't know how to read it, it all seems so foreign.
Yeah.
But that's why pharmacists are the most accessible healthcare practitioner. Like, you know, if you go to a pharmacy and your pharmacist doesn't have time to talk to you, it's time to change pharmacies.
Yeah.
And you guys, we are facing a crisis in pharmacy that is very, very scary if you're kind of in the know, where there's a total vertical integration that is being proposed, where all of a sudden your prescribers and your drug developers and your drug manufacturers and your drug distributors, and then the middlemen that negotiate drug pricing, they're called pharmacy benefits managers, and they are one of the reasons your medication costs are so high. And then you've got the patient distribution side, the pharmacy pharmacists, when you totally vertically integrate all of that to where they're all employed by the same people, scary, very scary. And we're also, because the US subsidizes drug development for the entire world, we pay up to 7 times on average what foreign countries pay. When I did my diplomat in pharmacy law, it was all about drug pricing. And I was absolutely fascinated by how much we subsidize the whole world. Well, the problem with that is small local community independent pharmacies can't sustain. If you're being asked to dispense a drug and the patient is paying a $9 copay, but the drug costs you $109 to keep on the shelf, what do? You can't continually run a business in the red in that way. And it is creating massive pharmacy deserts, especially in places that have less population. I mean, I think in the entire western side of Montana, I think there's like less than 5 pharmacies.
Interesting.
Can you imagine? I mean, like, absolutely, can you imagine if you're having to drive 100 miles, 200 miles, 300 miles to get to a pharmacy?
Dependent on your medication. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very scary and very hard.
Yeah. And then we've got also, there's another whole class of medications that are called orphan drugs. And the idea behind the orphan drugs is one that is so philanthropic and one that is so good. It's basically saying we are going to incentivize drug companies to come up with life-saving medications for diseases that like 6 people have. Okay. Sounds great, right? And the problem is, if you're a parent and you've got a child with this disease, or if you're an adult child and your ailing parents have this disease, you're willing to go to the ends of the earth to save a loved one's life. Well, what happens when you get slapped with, okay, yeah, you can have this medication, but it's going to cost you $1,000 for 3 doses? Yeah. You know, look at Paxlovid. That was the medication created to help prevent death in COVID. You're talking $37,000 a dose.
It's capitalism in pharmacy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, pharmacy is 100% capitalism. Like,
it's horrible.
Well, you know, I mean, listeners can have their own views, but socialized medicine globally is built on the back that the U.S. subsidizes drug development so much. And it's one of the reasons that the Inflation Reduction Act, we need to be paying more attention to it, because that is the only negotiating tool that we've ever had in American history that allows us to wrangle drug pricing.
Okay, so can you explain to me why we're subsidizing the entire world essentially? And did I say that correctly?
Because we have no cap on what drug companies can charge for their medications. So if you live in England or in Norway or in Finland, the government is going to say, like, yeah, right, you're not charging that. Or like, you know, look at what happened with the COVID vaccines when they went off of governmental subsidies, which we can have a debate all day long about like whether or not the COVID vaccines are safe and effective. But before we had them, we did have a lot of people dying in very rapid order. But when we stopped subsidizing the medications, you would think that because taxpayer dollars paid for the vaccine development and then subsidized the price of it so that we could distribute it, not just within the US, but globally, you would think that drug companies would sit back and like have a heart and go like, maybe we should continue. If you believe that the COVID vaccine is life-saving, give it away. Give it away. I mean, Jonas Salk, the creator of the first ever vaccine, has a very famous quote because he did not want to patent it. And he said, number one, it was close-ish to a natural product, but he said you can't patent the sun, meaning, and in his mind, he was trying to say, like, if I know that this is so life-changing, why would I charge people for it? But instead, what drug companies did was jacked up the price of the COVID vaccine, and now we're paying out the wazoo for it. And we have to wrangle how much we are willing to pay for medications, as other countries have been very, very successful with. But it is in part the reason that we're subsidizing drug development is because number one, Americans love capitalism and we want to be the best of the best at everything. But it's also because we don't hold drug companies accountable in tons and tons of ways. I mean, look at the opiate crisis and how misleading the initial data was on that. And what was done was nothing short of criminal, and yet no jail time has ever been served. It's just, it's a messed up system, which was why I kind of had to take a step back from it, even though I love the knowledge base that I have as a pharmacist, because I know that what has become so ingrained into my DNA has the ability to save someone's life from having an adverse drug reaction.
Yeah. Okay. I want to make sure I'm following you. Just bear with me. What I'm hearing, or kind of the puzzle pieces I'm putting together from listening to you, is that we don't put a cap on what we charge. We're subsidizing, but also, does that have to do with the payout that different people are receiving? Like, why aren't we putting a cap? Maybe I didn't follow you fully. I mean,
because we've never had legislation to ensure that we have to.
And I said, a lot of politicians do get personal payouts.
Yeah, lobbyists are real. Yes.
So I'm assuming that this plays a big part in it, right? This in us not having.
Well, and it's not just politicians. It's like the revolving door between the FDA and Big Pharma. And it is the revolving door between the NIAID, where all the infectious disease medications go through. It's like, if you've got somebody who has a few years as an insider, like at the FDA, and has this really niche drug class, well, a drug company is going to come in, swoop them up, and all of a sudden they've got $1 million sign-on bonus as like a big old thank you gesture. And so it's not just that we don't, I mean, let's be completely honest. Drug companies make up drug pricing. They just make it up. Yes, they're trying to cover their R&D costs, but until we had the Inflation Reduction Act, we did not, which is now a law, we did not have any kind of cap on what drug companies could charge, irrespective of how much taxpayer money had been put into the drug development process. And so we're starting to wrangle those drug prices, which again, not to make this a political discussion, but the Inflation Reduction Act goes back to the Affordable Care Act. And unfortunately, the drug legislation is buried within hundreds and hundreds of pages of manufacturing, electrical retrofitting, and all of this stuff that's considered like green technologies. And so that's one of the problems with the way that we write legislation is, number one, it's like they said in Hamilton, like it's too many dang pages for anybody to understand. Nobody reads it. And so buried within this, what Trump has referred to as like this new Green Deal, where we see a lot of people still dependent on oil and gas mining and coal mining in this country. It's like you're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to drug pricing. And so my hope and prayer is that we're able to maintain this portion of the legislation, because if we throw it all out as just like, well, who cares about solar panels? You may or may not care about solar panels. I don't care what your personal opinion is, but the fact of the matter is, why is drug pricing including in what is a manufacturing?
Why is that lumped in there? That's weird.
It just got kind of snuck in there, but that's the way you got to be in the right rooms. I mean, not to quote Hamilton again, but you got to be in the room where it happens. And somebody was back there saying like, okay, we'll give you this, but you give us that. And, that is the way our democracy functions in a way.
Yeah. Okay. So even not that I'm some guru, but I've come from the mental health field. So even I, at moments, were like, okay, let me follow this, because I'm on a learning curve right now with a lot of this stuff. And so I know that some of my listeners are probably, whoa, what? Like my brain just blew up. And so can you give that person, right, who's just starting their journey of really trying to understand things on a deeper level, educate themselves, inform themselves, what are a couple of basic things they can do to just start that journey to informing themselves and making more informed decisions when they go in to speak with their doctors and things of that nature?
Number one is go in with a list of questions prepared, because in that heat of the moment, one of the downsides of American medicine is doctors are paid on volume, not on results. And so if you go in and the physician's coming in, you got like 12 minutes before they're scurrying out the door, every question that you had in your head just goes, yeah. You just forget. Even I do. And I'm in this field. And so go in with questions prepared. I've already mentioned, pharmacists are a very accessible healthcare professional. If you've never sat down with a pharmacist with your entire group of medications, that is something called medication reconciliation or medication therapy management, where I would sit down with patients and say, tell me what this medicine is, what it is for, how you take it, what do you know to look out for, and really just think about, you need to know your dose, route, and frequency, right? If you're going to take a medication, you need to know what's the dose, how do I take it, and how often do I take it. Beyond that, you need to know what to look out for to know if the medication is working or if it is not working. And so this is I think of blood thinning medications when I think of this. Well, okay, if I'm on a blood thinning medication, let's say for atrial fibrillation, where your, top of your heart's just kind of quivering instead of having coordinated beats, you need to know signs and symptoms of a stroke. You also need to know signs and symptoms of bleeding and ask those questions. What do I need to look out for while I'm on this medicine? We talk about side effects, but I laugh because there aren't really side effects of medication. There are just effects that you like and effects that you don't.
Right.
And so you can ask, what effects am I going to be looking for? And if you're not seeing those effects, especially if you're experiencing the side effects, maybe it's not the medication for you. But really go in with that attitude of why am I taking this medication? What is it prescribed for? How long will I need to be on this medication? Is this a lifelong thing? Are there lifestyle interventions that I can take that would help me to get off of this medication? These are all really basic questions. APHA always says, know your medicines and know your pharmacist. And I completely agree with that. And if you are in the hospital, and you're being discharged, before discharge, ask, are there any outpatient education programs? If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes or COPD or heart failure or just had a heart attack, chances are your local hospital or a local pharmacy has some sort of education program where you can go in, and if you don't understand how to use your glucometer or how to check your blood sugar, they can explain that and make sure that you know how to do those types of activities that are going to keep you safer long term. And so ask for the education. And you may have to ask multiple people, and the answers may surprise you where they come from. It may not come from the doctor, but a nurse that you mentioned something in passing, or a pharmacist who's coming in to check on you. I think a lot of people when they're in the hospital, they don't even know they have a pharmacist, but you always have a pharmacist.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that until you said it, right? It's I knew it, but I didn't remember it.
Mm-hmm. And ask to talk to your social worker, ask to talk to your case manager, ask to talk to the chaplain, ask to talk to loads of different people. You have access to resources, especially if you're not self-employed and have really good insurance from a corporation, which is a huge blessing that I don't have, and I'm a little salty about it. But ask for the support, and ask for it in all the places, because guess what? You do have a case manager. You do have a social worker. You do have a nurse. You do have a pharmacist. You do have a chaplain. You do have a physician. You have all of these people that honestly want to be called. I was just talking with a group last night, and one of the girls was bemoaning that she just took a new job, and she's like, I'm the only counselor. Everybody else like has their cliques and I'm all on my own. How good does it feel if a patient is all of a sudden like, I want to speak to a counselor, I think. She's like, off I go to save the day, just like getting the best of it. So ask the questions. And if you're being rushed and you feel like you're not getting the information that you really want, really have the authority within you. I mean, like, look, let's call a spade a spade. You're paying that physician's bills. You're paying the pharmacist's bills. Say, before you go, I have a few more questions. And just sit there and wait. Most people don't get into healthcare because they don't want to help people. People genuinely want to help. It's just, you get so jaded by the system. But a patient who is genuinely empowered and really wants to learn is an inspiration for a healthcare professional, because we just want you to be healthy. We want you to be better. We want you to wake up tomorrow feeling better than you felt this morning when you woke up. That's the whole goal.
Love what you just shared. And I want to just tack on to that, because I think some people don't feel they can take that authority as the patient, right? That ownership. Maybe they don't have college, they don't have a degree, and it doesn't matter. It's your body, right? And this is your treatment. This is your life. And even if you feel a question sounds stupid, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. And if you don't get the education you're looking for with grace and patience, because that has happened. I mean, I've experienced with plenty of doctors who were irritated by my questions and were rushing me, then try somewhere else. Just like Lindsey said, try a pharmacist, right? Don't stop trying. Because you're too important, your health is too important, your life is too important. And it really starts with you knowing that, even if you don't have the knowledge, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been listening to some podcasts recently just about, everybody gets into healthcare because they want to help people, but sometimes people get a little derailed, and you have to, especially in moments of crisis, be it childbirth, an emergency surgery, be it hospice, be it end of life care in any way, form, sometimes you need somebody to advocate for you.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask for that. Cause, I've listened to some podcasts that are just absolutely horrifying about things that happen around these critical moments. Unfortunately, birth and death bring out the best and the worst in families. And if there's dissension in the ranks about what to do, sometimes you just need somebody to come in and put a different pair of glasses on and look at the situation more objectively and say, okay, here are your actual options. And, I've been listening to a lot of childbirth podcasts recently, and I think having somebody in the room to say, like, do you understand what they're saying? How can I clarify this for you? That's another thing just on advocacy, to advocate for yourself. If your healthcare professional is always asking closed-ended questions and all you're saying is yes and no, expound on that. Because I don't want to should people, but they could be asking open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Tell me what you understand about this medication. Tell me what you understand about your new diagnoses. Tell me about this. Tell me about your life and what you're going home to. I mean, the number of patients I saw with, acute COPD exacerbations that I didn't know to ask them, like, hey, is there mold in your home? But really, you want people to be asking you questions that require a full sentence as an answer and not just yes and no.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I mean, all of my experience, pretty much almost all of my experience with medical providers specifically have been very close-ended, right? Get right to the business. There's not a lot of asking about peripheral things that could be affecting. And any time that conversation was had was because I brought it up. And the only reason why I felt like I could is because of how I'm built and because I have somewhat of a background in academia. It might not be direct, but I understand why other people don't always feel they can steer the ship of their, of asking questions and what their appointment looks like co-labor with the medical provider. And it's intimidating. I mean, I have felt intimidated. And I know I'm smart and I know that I am asking these questions and it can be intimidating. And so it's really important to, in fact, your story or what you said reminded me when I was in labor, I was it was a very vulnerable time. I went from having a home birth to having a hospital birth.
Yeah.
And definitely very frowned upon, right? As I come into the room. And I was being questioned nonstop about all sorts of things while I'm in labor, and things I'm advocating for is just like being shut down without really an explanation. And one of the nurses finally said, "Why don't you just let her try it?"
Yeah.
And I was so thankful because I was in so much distress that I couldn't articulate in any kind of intelligent, constructive way why I wanted to try to put myself into labor with nipples to me, all the stuff, right? And she's like, just let her try it.
Yeah.
How much harm is that going to do? Then she's going to feel like she did what she needed to do for her child. And if it doesn't work, great. Then you'll give her the Pitocin.
Mm-hmm.
And they let me try it. And I was so thankful. She's an angel, right? And I did put myself into labor. And so, but it was just, even if I hadn't been able to put myself into labor, I just wanted to feel like I had somewhat of a participation in what was going on. But in that moment, I was so deeply vulnerable, right? That I just, it was too chaotic. It was too crazy. And so I love what you're saying about find somebody to advocate for you, whether it's another professional, wherever you are, or a friend, a trusted family member, right? Who is not as emotionally involved or whatever it is. This is so important. I think it was really great that you said that.
Yeah. And, there are professionals that you can hire for this exact thing. And just special shout out, like, as much as nobody wants to think about end of life, get your advance directive done, get your will done, like get it in writing what you want. And I was really grateful for my medical power of attorney. I chose one of my best friends because she is one of the most highly skilled intensive care pharmacists that I've ever known. And I was like, well, at least she's going to know what they're saying when they're talking. And, she had me answer a series of like 20 or 30 questions about like, okay, it's not just about, do you want to be placed on mechanical ventilation? Well, I had like to really sit back and think like, okay, if I'm in a wreck tomorrow, do I want to be placed on mechanical ventilation? Abso-freaking-lutely. If I'm 99 and like have lived a great life, I just want like people with like pennants around and us having like a party. You know what I mean? Like, and so really get descriptive with your family because it can save so much heartache. And so, write it down. There's nothing morbid about it. And if you want to know more about that, listen to my podcast interview with Alua Arthur. She, just like there are doulas for birth, she's a death doula. And so she helps families to navigate death and how it can impact family structures, family dynamics. And she'd be great on your show to talk about how it impacts mental health. Absolutely.
And we have been chatting forever. I don't want to
I know.
And I just want to say I'm so thankful for you have given such an incredible education and just some insight that I think will be so powerful for people listening. And I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, I love you, sis. It's been such a blessing to get to know you and to work with you. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely. And you guys tell everybody your Instagram handle. I'm going to link everything you provided in the show notes as well, but tell them where to find you.
Yeah. So I'm at Lindsey Elmore on Instagram and at Dr. Lindsey Elmore on Pinterest. And I also, you can find me at the Lindsey Elmore Show, lindseyelmore.com. If you know my name, you know how to find me. There you go.
Okay, guys. I can't wait to hear what you think about this episode. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
I am eternally grateful you tuned into The Truth About Mental Health. If this message matters to you, please spread the word by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with someone who needs this knowledge. Let's keep reclaiming our mental health together.